Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that his troops are at the height of battle in Gaza and that they've passed the outskirts of their main target, Gaza City. The health ministry in Gaza, run by Hamas, which is proscribed, a terrorist organization by the UK, says that more than 9,000 people have now been killed there in the last 3.5 weeks. At the Rafah crossing to Egypt, 400 more people were authorised to leave. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Porrick O'Brien, has this and a warning. There are distressing images in his report.
In the last few hours, Benjamin Netanyahu announced that Israeli troops are, quote, at the height of the battle in their ground offensive in Gaza, moving beyond the suburbs and into the heart of Gaza City in the north of the Strip. Flanked by soldiers at a military base in central Israel, he said they were making, quote, impressive progress and that nothing would stop them as they move beyond the outskirts. He also acknowledged the, quote, painful losses of the 19 Israeli soldiers now reported killed since the start of the ground operation. To coincide with this, the IDF released this footage today, a commanding officer rallying troops on the approach into Gaza City. It's now almost a month since Hamas's murderous outrage on October the 7th, and the Israeli army are moving into the centre of Gaza City from at least 5 different directions. In their path, the neighbourhood of Jabalia. This was filmed for us there last night. The refugee settlement has been targeted twice in the last 48 hours. Hundreds have been killed here. Gaza's Hamas-run Ministry of Health now says over 9,000 people have been killed in the Strip, almost half of them under the age of 18. Little Sham Abu Safia is 1.5, pulled from the rubble, but survived. Brought to the Kamal Adwan hospital, and after 30 minutes of resuscitation, revived. Doctors we spoke to at the hospital today told us her immediate family were all killed last night. In the north of Israel this evening, this was the scene across 19 different locations. Rockets launched by Hezbollah from Lebanon landed in places like this largely evacuated Israeli town. Along with this cinema-style trailer, the preamble to a speech tomorrow by the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, the region holding its breath about what the speech will mean by way of conflict contagion. In the south of the Gaza Strip, the Rafah crossing today into Egypt, a bureaucratic bottleneck of both relief and of pain. A second day where the dry administration of stamping passports meets the tears of heartbreak and escape. Egypt, Israel and Hamas have agreed to allow several hundred people through so far, mainly foreigners or Palestinians with dual nationalities, along with a handful of the severely injured. The lucky ones on the lists checked against their passports. VIP access to survival. The majority on the list so far are US citizens, 400 of them approved to leave today.
I'm not even excited to leave Gaza because we have so many people that we love and care about. So right now I'm between ice and fire. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to see the family that I left behind or the friends that I left behind. People are dying. Everybody is dying.
A handful of the 200 or so British nationals stuck in Gaza are also on today's list. Then there's everyone else. Take Gad el-Saka, who's Egyptian, and her daughter, visiting relatives in Gaza when the war started, now trapped inside. The relative's house they were staying in was destroyed. These the tiny handful that got out through Rafah today. There are over 2 million people, though, still stuck inside Gaza. Like this young boy in Jabalia. What else will his eyes see in the days and in the weeks to come?
Well, earlier I spoke to Nibal Fasak from the humanitarian organization, the Palestine Red Crescent Society. They're operating in Gaza and helping to transport patients to the border. I began by asking about the situation for Palestinians in and around Gaza City, where we know there's been very heavy fighting.
The situation in Gaza and the north is catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of civilians are still in Gaza and the north. Those who were unable to evacuate themselves because there is intense bombardments that is taking place all over Gaza, and literally there is no safe place in Gaza. So now hospitals not only having injured, wounded people, patients, they are now shelters for thousands of displaced people who are currently sheltering in hospitals corridor, lying on the ground because simply they don't have any place to go to. And they were unable to evacuate themselves because there is no transportation, complete destruction of the road and infrastructure. There is no fuel, and there is intense bombardments. So the only solution for them is just to seek refuge to the nearest school or nearest hospitals. Unfortunately, those are suffering from lacking every single humanitarian need.
So if you are injured as a Palestinian in that part of the Gaza Strip by an aerial bombardment, what are your chances of survival?
So basically, hospitals now, every single hour, are just receiving hundreds of injured and wounded people. So now those injured and wounded people are just waiting on hospitals corridor, waiting there in line until they got the chance to have the treatment. Now doctors have to make choices and prioritize who is the most urgent situation to start deal with it and try their best to save as much people as they can.
And we know that many people have now been evacuated, injured people have been evacuated through the Rafah gate into Egypt. How do you decide, how do the authorities there decide who gets to be evacuated and who doesn't?
Basically, there is so much, many standards that have been put, and this is between the ministry, the Palestinian Ministry of Health and the Egyptian Ministry of Health, along with Israel authorities who need to give permission for the names of injured people who are allowed to go out for a treatment. For example, according to one of my colleagues who reported to me yesterday, there was a boy, he is injured and he needs to be transported to get a treatment. The Israel authorities gave the approval for the child, but not for the father. So sadly, the dad and his son has to go back to Gaza because simply he can't leave his son alone travel to Egypt.
Okay, finally, if you could evacuate all the injured people from the Gaza Strip to Egypt for treatment, how many thousands of people are we talking about?
So basically now the numbers of injured people has exceeded around 18,000 who are now injured. We have inside Al-Quds Hospital, which is operating by the Palestine Red Crescent, 14,000 civilians who are now inside the hospital. Those who are internally displaced, they don't have any place to go to. So they sought refuge to Al-Quds Hospital. We have 500 patients. Many of them are in the intensive care unit. And now Israel threatening us of evacuation orders because Al-Quds Hospital is going to be bombarded. We have announced repeatedly that we don't have the means to evacuate Al-Quds Hospital. Evacuating the patients means killing them because we have patients who are connected to life support machines. We have babies in incubators. And on top of that, every single day, at least for the 3 past days, up to this moment, I'm talking to you, and there's intense bombardments that is taking place on the surrounding area of Al-Quds Hospital.
You paint a very grim picture there. Nibal Fasak, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, this afternoon in Tel Aviv, I sat down with former Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni and began by asking, with much of the world appalled by the enormous loss of life in the Gaza Strip, what is her response to those critical of Israel?
I'm not asking the international community or the Arab world to turn a blind eye to what we are doing in Gaza, but I would expect them to judge it in accordance to their own parameters and moral aspects. Because what happened is that a terrorist organization, jihadists, infiltrated into our villages, massacred in the most brutal, unthinkable manner children and women and kidnapped more than 200. While Israel, as a democracy, needs to defend its citizens. And while we are doing so, we are trying to avoid, to prevent, or to minimize the civil casualties.
If you're trying to do everything to avoid those casualties, looking at the numbers, you're not doing a very good job there, are you?
You know, I was in the Israeli cabinet security cabinet during 2 rounds of military operations in Gaza. I was also there in one of them. I was also as a Minister of Justice, and each and every target was approved by the Attorney General, asking whether it's in accordance to the international law or not. So in any war, and Hamas
even now, at the moment?
Hamas waged war against Israeli civilians. So the comparison, well, they killed this number and you killed more of them, so now it's even. No, this is not the reason of the military operation. It's not about rage or it's not even about retaliation. We tried everything.
I think it was an Israeli writer who said that Gaza is an open-air prison run by some very vicious inmates.
We
Hamas.
don't want Gaza, we didn't want Gaza to be a prison. The only way that we cannot afford Gaza to be open, because they are using everything to get weapons, to rearm themselves.
There are plenty of people in this country who have told me you can try and kill dozens, hundreds of Hamas commanders. You're not going to kill the idea behind it. And because of the violence of the last few weeks, the idea will only get stronger.
I mean, come on. You know, people are speaking about ceasefire, but there was ceasefire on October 6th, but yet
I'm talking about the long-term arrangement here.
No, but it's a vicious circle. What you are saying is that when we are acting against terror, so then they will hate us more. So if we don't want this war now to be just another round, there's a need to think together about the day after, and I agree with you. The day after, this is something that the international community should work with, the legitimate Palestinian Authority, with Egypt, with the US, with the United Nations. It's very complicated solution, but yet, look at the situation. You have a legitimate Palestinian Authority that is not even willing to take responsibility on Gaza.
But on that point, you know, again, there are many people inside Israel who've told me repeatedly that the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, has gone out of his way to undermine the authority of the Palestinian Authority.
Listen, I am...
And you're not a fan of his?
No, listen, I'm not only not a fan, I was the leader of the opposition, I'm one of his historical opponents, and yes, we have...
But is that true? Is that a fair accusation, that he's been trying to undermine a two-state solution with a moderate Palestinian partner?
Yes, but this is not the reason for what we faced, okay?
But don't you think that the two-state solution, which you apparently still believe in, President Biden still believes in it, I've not come across a single person in this country in the last month who tells me honestly that they still believe this is possible.
You know, you were just speaking about the Palestinians. How could they believe in peace when they are seeing, when they are looking at the destruction in Gaza? So trust me, it will be very difficult now to meet the Israelis that will, after they saw this massacre and this evil and brutality, to say yes, it's just Hamas and not all the Palestinians. But I hope, okay, I hope that we will find a way to live in peace. And the only way to live in peace, I believe, is in accordance to a just solution.
C.P. Livni, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, tonight, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling back to the Middle East for the third time in 3 weeks, where he's expected to urge Israel to pause its attacks periodically. Our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy joins me now. Siobhan, tell us more.
Well, Matt, this all began yesterday when a protester asked Joe Biden to demand a ceasefire in Gaza, and the president responded, "I think we need a pause." Now, the White House has been at great pains to say there's nothing new in that idea, that the White House has been asking, desiring a humanitarian pause, saying that for over a week now. But that language has always been qualified with the idea that a pause must be considered. So it is a subtle change, but it does seem very clear that President Biden has gone from a polite request, if you like, to more of a gentle demand in his language. We need a pause, he now seems to be saying, and that's the message that he'll be sending with his Secretary of State, as you said there, Antony Blinken, who is on his second emergency mission to the Middle East. He spoke to journalists on the tarmac a while back when he left, and he said that he would be discussing urgent steps, he said, that can and should be taken to minimize civilian casualties. Let's hear how he put that now.
This is something that the United States is committed to. I'm not going to get into the details here, but it's very much on the agenda. When I see a Palestinian child, a boy, a girl, pulled from the rubble of a collapsed building, that hits me in the gut as much as seeing a child in Israel or anywhere else. So this is something that we have an obligation to respond to, and we will.
Well, as the casualties mount, Joe Biden knows that he is under increasing pressure both internationally and domestically here, particularly among the Muslim community, to bring about some kind of pause. The White House has now confirmed that those pauses will be on the agenda, but they've said that they will not back any form of ceasefire in Gaza, which they believe would only serve to benefit Hamas. Matt.